Welcome to The Leadership Required Now. My name is Casey Deems, and I'll be running this Dialogue for Health web forum with my colleague, Merlene Tucker. Now it's time to meet the moderator of today's event, Dr. Carmen Rita Nevares. Dr. Carmen Nevares is the Senior Vice President Emeritus of External Relations and Preventive Medicine at the Public Health Institute, a senior executive position she held from 1998 to 2021. Dr. Nevares has been the director of the PHI Center for Health Leadership and Impact since 2011 and the creator and director of Dialogue for Health since 2008. Welcome, Carmen.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Casey, for that introduction. Next slide. Yeah, it's our pleasure to really start out this incredibly important dialogue right now. This is a time where we need more than ever to really listen to how to bring in the kinds of conversations, the kinds of voices that we need in order to move our work forward. The Center for Health Leadership and Impact that is bringing you this, this presentation today is a project of Public Health Institute. Public Health Institute's mission is to advance well-being and health equity with communities around the world, and it's been doing that for 55 years. The Center for Health Leadership and Impact is a center that is designed around applying data-driven strategies and helping design thinking to help you create the greatest impact. We do that by working with data, figuring out strategies, bringing the best partnerships together, creating coalitions, supporting action that really matters and that creates an impact for you and for the communities that you work with. It is my huge pleasure to invite Professor Loretta Ross to the screen and to the podium. I want to let you all know that Loretta Ross is a very gifted and accomplished, nationally recognized expert on racism and racial justice, women's rights, and human rights. Her work emphasizes the intersectionality of social justice issues and how intersectionality can fuel transformation. Ross is a 2022 MacArthur Fellow and Associate Professor at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, in the program for the study of women and gender, teaching courses on white supremacy, race and culture in America, human rights, and calling in the calling out culture. So with that, please, let me welcome Professor Loretta Ross.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I have had the privilege of doing social justice activism for the better part of 50 years, actually longer than 50 years. I started when I was 16 and I'm 69 now. Oh, how time flies when you're having fun. I'm also a professor, as you read, at Smith College. I started my academic career only 5 years ago. So I tend to think of myself as a fake academic, but they call me a clinical professor because I have the privilege of teaching what I learned in community in the classroom. And so it's a fun job to have. And this is what brings me to y'all this evening. And you heard the y'all, so you can tell I'm a Southerner. Let me just get that out there too. Matter of fact, I'm the worst of the Southerners because I'm a Texan, and we're the most obnoxious people in the world. But moving right along, I became aware of the call out culture only about a decade ago because I was not on social media. Boomers aren't necessarily the ones that immediately go on social media. But once I got on it, I found out how unbelievably mean people are to each other online in ways that I doubt that they would do it in person. So I started studying this phenomenon. Turns out that the young people are very much aware of this culture of calling out and public shaming and things like that, but they didn't know what to do about it. And a little bit of my background might be useful. In my 20s, I directed the first rape crisis center in this country, in the DC Rape Crisis Center. And there I work with a program called Prisoners Against Rape. And that was a very interesting task that I had because as a rape survivor, I had to learn how to teach Black feminist theory to men incarcerated for raping and murdering women. Fast forward 20 years later, by my 40s, I was monitoring hate groups for the National Anti-Klan Network, the Center for Democratic Renewal. In that job, my job became to work with people who had been formerly in the hate movement, in the white supremacist movement, who were trying to rebuild their lives in normal society. I have to say that I was not prepared to try to figure out how to have conversations with ex-Klansmen, ex-neo-Nazis, the people who were very comfortable in hating me. I had to learn how to have conversations with them. And so I discovered in myself that once I got to know people, I couldn't hate them anymore. I did learn to have conversations with the most unlikely and improbable people. So when I learned about the call out culture and what young people were doing and walking around on verbal eggshells for fear of saying the wrong thing or having some tweet that they had put out there come back to bite them in the ass, I thought that I had something useful to offer to this conversation because I've spent a career talking to people that I wouldn't necessarily bring home for dinner. But I've learned to cross political divides, social divides, racial divides, and class divides to have conversations with people. I also think that calling in techniques are very teachable. And so I've been teaching them online for the last 3 years. It started with COVID for the last 3 years. And if you have any interest in taking the course, it's at my website, lorettajross.com. It is very affordable. It's only $5 a class, and the entire class is only $20. I call myself the Walmart of consciousness raising when I offer people a chance to learn calling in techniques. So let's first start with the theory of calling in so that you can have an idea of what I'm talking about. I've created something called the 5C continuum of the calling in culture. The first C is calling out. And I think that's what we're mostly familiar with because it's publicly criticizing and shaming people for things you think they've done wrong and you think that they should be held accountable for it. Now, the word in that phrase that's working the hardest is publicly doing it. Because obviously you could privately speak to someone and offer them feedback on their using the word choice or misgendering somebody or anything. But the fact that you choose a public way of demanding accountability makes it a call out. And with that call out, you've invited them not into a conversation, but into a fight. Because it's only human if somebody publicly shames and blames us to get defensive, to want to deny that any harm was done, and to basically engage in a conflict. The ultimate call out is the second C. That's canceling people. That's when you think someone has done something so wrong, so egregious, that you think they should pay for it and you want to get them really good. So that means you want them to lose their job, lose their platform, or at least lose their reputation. And you do that quite publicly too. What we've since learned though, and I'm sure you've seen this, that when you try to cancel people who are sufficiently rich and powerful, it doesn't really work because that just brings them more fame, more attention, more cachet. It really, cancellation only seems to really work on people who are already vulnerable, people who are already being marginalized by society or teaching something very unpopular in colleges and universities. We find that most professors, for example, who get fired for teaching subjects are on the left, not on the right, but it is the right that is mostly complaining about the call out cancel culture as if they're particularly vulnerable to it. Yet we're seeing these attempts to cancel all kinds of education, counseling, teaching Black history, critical race theory, anything on LGBT rights, all of that happening. But this ain't that speech, so let me go on. The third C is calling in. Actually, calling in is a call out, but instead of using anger, blaming, and shaming as your weapon, one uses love and respect. And you're still pursuing accountability, but you're choosing to do it in such a way that keeps the humanity of the person in the center of the lens rather than trying to embarrass them or shame them or cause them to feel awful about themselves. And so a classic calling in approach would be, when you used that word the other day, I'm not quite sure what you meant by that. Can we go out and talk about it? Can we have a cup of coffee and talk about it, for example? Or you could say, I can't believe you said that word. That makes you toxic, racist, whatever kind of thing. And so that's the difference basically between a calling out and a calling in. What is your approach going to be? And can you give people an opportunity to be heard and respected versus making assumptions about them and going after them with, full force of condemnation? The fourth C is the intermediate step between calling out and calling in, and that's calling on people. When you call people out or you're calling people in, you're actually making a commitment to invest time and attention in that person. So whether you've invited them to a fight or invited them into an authentic conversation, the point is it's going to take your time and it's going to take your attention. So calling on is when you don't want to give either of those things. It's a simple request for people to do better. So a classic calling on approach would be, oh, I know you're a great person, Dr. Carmen. So how can I reconcile the great person that I know you are with the words that just came out of your mouth? With that kind of approach, you're not demanding that that Dr. Carmen do anything but consider how she wants to present herself to the world, as the good person you know she is, or the person who would say something problematic out of her mouth. It's her choice. And the fifth C is one that I think we should deploy far more often than we do, and that's calling it off. We have no obligation to engage in unproductive conversations with people who are not operating in good faith, who do not actually want to have a conversation. They just want to shout you down, win at all costs, lie if they have to, exaggerate harm, do all the things that get themselves attention without moving at all towards a resolution of the problem. Now, that's the overall theory of the 5C continuum. I'm hoping that we can build a calling in culture in our society, because I think more people are exhausted by the call out culture and they don't see an end to all the viciousness that's taking place in our society. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how the call out culture affects us in our workplaces. Because it's obvious that it affects us in social media, it affects us in our politics, it affects us in our civic and our religious organizations, but more specifically, it's affecting us pretty badly within our workplaces. And that's where I want to focus the last few minutes of conversation I have. I think that there's a lot of conflict in our workplaces being driven by the call out culture. And part of the responsibility for this is that most of us in leadership haven't really been taught how to treat the people we lead better, how to take care of them, how to meet their needs, how to make them feel human and heard. And at the same time, those of us who are very experienced in leadership are dealing with something that we're not quite sure how to handle because our workforce is younger, queer, more female, more intersectional, and they don't use the previous workplace social contract rules of loyalty to a company or a paycheck that some of us are used to. And we find ourselves sometimes caught in the halls between meetings where somebody deeply criticizes what the organization is doing or what you're doing personally. And it's a bit befuddling to those of us in leadership when we find out that our worst critics are not our competitors, but our worst critics are actually on our own payrolls, and we don't know how to deal with that. I also think that the generational divides make managing our organizations much more difficult. I feel that a lot of people have trauma around leadership, and so they have a tendency to assume the worst of leadership, to go on attack against leadership, and have the false belief that they can flatten a hierarchy and everybody should have the same power and authority, regardless of the differences in their skill levels. In the fields that we work in, we attract people with a lot of social justice passion, a lot of human rights consciousness, who believe that they have to disrupt the status quo in the system, but they're very frustrated over their ability to address these external threats. And then it causes them to sometimes overstate the internal threats and use the words that are non-answerable, like malicious or toxic or manipulative or racist, sexist, those kinds of things. And this is not about particular leaders or leadership styles, but sometimes it's failures of systems. And if we want to turn this around, we've got to work towards building the collective power of everyone instead of tearing each other down. We're also seeing this take place in the midst of a lot of job precarity, where we really are dealing with crises in our economy, and people feel this precarity, they feel this nervousness, but at the same time, they want to be heard, they want to be respected, and they privilege that much more over a paycheck quite often. And what happens with the call out culture is that instead of addressing the systemic issues within the organization that might be evidence of racism or sexism or homophobia or whatever, you end up with a lot of normal workplace grievances smuggled in, saying, oh, I'm really fighting for work-life balance or more racial or gender diversity kind of thing. And the call-out culture keeps us from even addressing these systemic problems. I think that a lot of people sometimes feel like their moral commitment to the job is being exploited by leaders and managers, regardless of the pay, so that they think that they're enduring miserable working conditions and that people are taking advantage of them. On the other hand, the leaders feel that their staff is ignoring or major external and internal challenges facing the organization, while the employees feel that social justice or human rights or healthcare organizations should meet all of their needs. And we have structures within our institutions that confuse people, like the human resources departments and the DEI departments of all our institutions have as their first obligation loyalty to the organization, where a lot of people mistakenly think that the purpose of human resources or the DEI office is to be loyal to the employees. And so that confusion makes people have high expectations of HR or DEI that they are not structured to actually meet. One of the things that I advise people when I encounter this call out culture within our organizations is to help people understand that the workplace is not a healing or a therapy space. that it really is about the combined effort to achieve a common mission or goal. And this, by the way, this kind of call out culture doesn't even only affect white leaders or white bosses. Many leaders of color are attacked as being insensitive to marginalized community. And kind of paradoxically, the attack could even come from white staff who attack the leaders of color as being too insensitive to the needs of the workforce, that kind of thing. So it becomes a lose-lose situation for many of our organizations that are caught up in this call out culture, because if the organization chooses to investigate the subject of a call out and it doesn't turn out the way that the aggrieved employee wants, then they claim that the investigation was rigged and that the injustices were just papered over. But if an investigation is not launched because the level of harm is unclear or didn't take place or the harm was overstated, then the organization is going to be accused of ignoring the problem. And all of this will leave the staff very dissatisfied, claiming that a cover up took place, and they'll feel very invalidated. I'm also collecting data on how many managers and leaders feel that 90 to 95% of their time is being preoccupied with internal meetings that are often driven by the call out culture. And quite often, our DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues can serve as a cover for this dynamic, but it isn't properly a DEI question. It's a question of whether or not people can have compassionate and authentic communications with each other. But it does hamper the organization's ability to function if the leadership is spending so much time on solving internal drama instead of focusing externally on the mission that the organization was formed to create. And then at the same time, no one in the organization, particularly in the leadership, wants the public to know that these accusations of toxicity or mistreatment, mismanagement are occurring within the organization, because it can often feel like you're loading bullets into your opponent's guns if this news gets out there. And so when these kinds of blowups happen, quite often people engage in public relations rather than excavating to get to the root of the problem and helping people understanding how to have more collegial calling in conversations with each other. I sometimes think that the problem is also if there's no theory of change guiding the organization. And if there is a theory of change, not enough people are aware of it to assist in implementing it. And this confusion makes people wanting to thirst for power and skills that they don't necessarily have the ability to handle, can make them be very accusatory towards leadership. And it makes leadership feel that they're under attack, that it's not a safe space for them to be vulnerable, to be truthful, and to be authentic with the people they have to lead. And then we've got this overstatement of harm, overstatement of extreme anxiety at the workplace. I hear a lot of that. And the employees are feeling very powerless sometimes. So they focus on what they believe they can control, like getting someone fired kind of thing in a real call out culture. So I think there's things we can do. We need to develop a theory of change if we already have one. Everybody in our organization should understand what it is. We need to understand both our internal and external challenges. We need to do a substantive organizational audit, usually through interviews with all the stakeholders so that we know where our weaknesses and our strengths are. And most of all, we have to give each other the benefit of the doubt. I say you have to call yourself in before you can call somebody else out. You have to know your tolerance for conflict. Why are you more invested in having a fight than a conversation with anybody? If you spent a lifetime practicing conflict avoidance, then you're going to do anything possible to avoid really looking at those things that make you uncomfortable. It also requires learning about self-forgiveness as a harm reduction strategy, to learn how to do better threat assessments so that someone offering a word that is no longer used, like calling somebody lame or crippled, isn't seen as a death threat to someone in the disability rights community, because there is a massive overstatement of harm that often takes place. I think we need to understand that we have this opportunity to build within our organizations a calling in culture. It starts with self-assessment. It starts with the ability to respectfully listen to other people. It starts with wanting people to succeed and doing what you can to help them succeed. It starts with not being afraid of conflict, but seeing conflicts as opportunities for learning and growing and things. And also when it is not going to work, because there are many people, unfortunately, who are not interested in a conversation. They're only interested in chaos and fighting. And so learning how to discern the difference in those kinds of situations is part of what's necessary. I'll close by talking about how to handle a call out, because that is the most useful thing I think people need to know, because we all can get called out. If you're not getting called out, that means you're not doing anything. There's always a critic somewhere, right? The first thing you do when someone calls you out is to say thank you. And even though that may sound counterintuitive, you can be quite sincere in that, because to call you in or out, they have gifted you with their attention and their time. And you know how much social media companies are paying to get our attention and our time? So you can sincerely say thank you as your first step. The second thing you want to do is to say something on the order of, I hear you. I'm going to take what you say into consideration, but I really appreciate your saying it. With that second step, you've indicated to them that you've heard them. And people most often just want to be heard, but you've not indicated that you actually agree with them. What you said is that I'm going to take it into consideration and I'm going to make up my own mind in my own time about what you say is relevant or important or not. And then the third thing you should do is turn the calling out into a calling in. And one way that I do that is say, well, I know you probably could have gotten my attention in any number of ways other than calling me out like you did. So that makes me wonder what's going on with you, because I care enough as much about you as I do about myself. So are you okay? Have you been ignored? Have you raised these issues before and you haven't been listened to? Are you not being heard? With those three steps, you could turn almost every call out into a conversation. And that's the goal, to have authentic conversations based on love, respect, and grace with each other so that we could all be on the same team pulling in the same direction. And so I'm going to shut up right there and give y'all a chance for Q&A, and thank y'all for listening to me.
Thank you so much. I think that the very heartfelt and insightful way in which you presented your thinking was, as Derek has said, that was awesome. I don't know a better word. That was awesome. I want to just encourage the audience. I love the reactions that we're seeing on the side, but I'd also like people to be sure to use the Q&A chat, throw in your thoughts and your questions for Professor Ross. This is such a wonderful opportunity to get to hear from somebody who has really walked the walk, and I think could really help us in the work that we're trying to do as we go forward. Let's see, I'd like to just
I see the Hamline University one.
Yeah,
I'd like
okay,
to speak to that.
let's start with that one. I'll go ahead and just briefly, for those who aren't aware of the situation in Hamlin, there was an adjunct faculty person who showed a picture of Muhammad in her history class, warning students ahead of time that she was going to do it because she knew it might be problematic to some students. One Muslim student complained, and it became a conversation about academic freedom and religious freedom versus student rights. How do you address these seemingly unresolvable conflicts without calling out?
I believe that this was a classic example of, first of all, a professor who was very much trying to do the right thing by showing the picture of Muhammad that had been actually painted by a Muslim artist that's been used in art history classes over and over again. She tried to provide trigger warnings and things like that to the class. And a particular student decided to read what the professor was doing as harm to her and her religion. And it ended up being very much an overstatement of harm, because the student had all kinds of opportunities to not participate, to not witness it, to not engage in it. And what I read is the student very securely wrapped herself in a victim mantle and decided that no matter what precautions were offered her, that she was going to declare herself as a victim, that there had been an assault against her religion. And then what complicated that situation was the overreaction of the administration of the school, that both fired the professor without due process and invited in a member of the Muslim community that then agreed with the student, which then got countered by other members of the Muslim community who disagreed with the firing of the professor. And so it was a big CF. I can't use the word, but y'all can imagine. And so it's a lesson in how we really have to stay calm in these kinds of situations and recognize that because a person is traumatized, and I believe the student feels she is truly traumatized, her trauma is her feelings, but her feelings may not be the objective truth. That's the distinction we have to make. Her feelings are true, but the question is the situation as she describes, or is there another truth that is there? And that is, she had choices, the student did, whether to engage in that class lecture, was even told by the professor that if you don't want to attend this lecture, you will get an excused absence. She chose to attend so that she could then proclaim her harm. There's a wonderful book called All Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman that I recommend that people read, because we're in a time in our society where everybody is claiming trauma, anxiety, and abuse as if it's, the oppression Olympics, and we all want to win first place in that. And it is clashing up against not only leadership and management, but basically, of course, free speech principles, the academic missions of our colleges and universities. It is creating a lot of problems. And then what it doesn't address, in my opinion, is the institutionalized racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia that should be a priority for a college and university to address, instead of this red herring of harm that we're dealing with in our society.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to skip around a little bit on the questions from the audience so that we can try to get to as many as possible. So here's a comment. Some of us have a moral compass that costs us financially and career-wise, and we're used to instill fear in some organization with corrupt leaders in the business. So we end up fighting and getting burnt alone as we fight for justice. I don't know if you have an answer for how to navigate that, but what are some options you recommend?
Well, I mean, there's the age-old truism of picking your battles. There's that. Um, but beyond that, I think that each of us negotiates. I don't know if my picture is jumping around on for y'all as much as it's doing for me, but it looks like I have an unstable internet connection. But anyway, I think we each negotiate with our consciousness in different way because we work in a neoliberal capitalist system. So by definition, we are compromising our human rights values, whether we want to or not, because of the systems in which we're enmeshed. So you need to work out the deal with yourself. How much can you accept? How much are you willing to trade off? Um, I don't think your loyalty should be to a paycheck, but to yourself. I quote one of my favorite writers who says that your reputation is what others think that they know about you, but your integrity is what you know about yourself. And you should protect your integrity, not your reputation. But within that, we're all going to make different deals that are compromises. But also, we shouldn't be what we call in the social justice movement maximalist, where, the perfect becomes the enemy of the good kind of thing. If it's not done exactly perfectly, then everything else is off the table. And so there's no one answer I can give to anybody in those situations that challenges our values and our integrity, but all of us have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror without shame. And so go as far as your integrity allows you to do, and then go somewhere else if you find staying there insupportable.
Thank you. You talked about calling it quits with some people who just want to sow chaos. Have you seen the calling in process work with folks who've gotten to that state? Or would you
No,
recommend
I have
just
not seen
walking
it work
away?
with that folks. I've not seen it work with that set of folks because they need therapy more so than they need a conversation if they've gotten to that point. And I'm not a professional therapist. I do have good success working with people who have different political opinions than I do, even some Trump supporters, for example, who I can respect and love, and they're in my family, so you know how that goes. Um, but they're the people who are earnestly trying to do the right thing, even if they're going about it the wrong way. But for people who profit off of conflict and misery, or who've fallen down a rabbit hole of conspiracy where they distrust everything that's told to them, I don't have any answers for that except to work hard to make sure they're not in positions to harm others, kind of thing. Calling in is not a panacea for having conversations with people who don't agree that gravity exists. I mean, all you can invite them to do is jump out a window and see what happens. So, yeah, I'm not trying to say it solves everything, but I think the majority of people in society, the vast majority, want to have productive conversations with each other, even if they start out on different political positions.
Thank you. I am still skipping around. I love the audience reaction. Thank you so much for that. It really helps us to know that we're hitting the right points here in this conversation. How do you see the harms of capitalism and a need for class consciousness intersecting with call-out culture? Is a call-out culture a misguided attempt to fight for economic equality? In the case of workers calling out for bonuses, how do we distinguish drama from the fight for workers' rights?
I want to make sure that we make a distinction between what we work on and how we work on it. I see calling out the 5C continuum, a how statement. But what we work on, whether it's class inequality, lack of access to health care, racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, those are the issues. But I'm offering the perspective that if we don't have a better how, we'll never get to the what. And so, for example, I believe that there is a stringent critique to offer to what we colloquially call the 1%ers. You know, the people who make such an embarrassing amount of money, they could solve global hunger if they were so disposed to do so. But I also advise people not to assume that everyone who is embarrassingly rich has the same politics, because you're stereotyping them. There is a great difference between a Bill Gates and an Elon Musk. And if you can't tell the difference, you have an underdeveloped analysis, because you have to have specific strategies for each of them. I also caution people not only against biological determinism, the belief that, you know, your biology is your destiny stuff, but against identity determinism, assuming that because someone has a given identity, they must be a certain way politically, or they must be grouped with other people who share that identity, kind of things. So as a seasoned community organizer, I always encourage us to sophisticate our analyses, do better threat assessments, and really put our focus on how to build the power to overcome those who profit from oppression. And that will mean, for example, working with people who don't agree with you. For example, when I'm talking to the young people in my class, they're always using the word performative. They're just performative activists. They're just performative. They're just trying to paper over stuff. And I used the example of the Black Lives Matter movement. I said, if you see a white person putting up a Black Lives Matter sign, instead of criticizing them because you think they should be doing more, and possibly they should be, but you don't know because you don't know them, instead of criticizing them, why don't you just accept that you already know the number one thing you need to know about them? And that is, they're not on the other side. A white supremacist has never put up a Black Lives Matter sign, ever, and never will. So at worst, the person who you're calling performative is an ally you need to work with and figure out how to work with. That's the worst they can be, is a problematic ally. And yet you're discarding them because in your eyes, without any research or evidence, they're just performative. And so I encourage people to develop better analyses.
Excellent advice. I want to ask you a little bit about working in different regions and sort of regional culture. You spoke about being in the South and now working in New England. This anonymous attendee has worked in many other locales and was wondering if you could speak to national and cultural nuance in dealing with these issues.
Oh, I find it delightful learning about different cultures, and there's so many microcultures in the United States. I just find it very exciting and delightful. I've been in 49 of the 50 states. I have no desire to go to Wyoming, so that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, because I'm from the South, let's take the issue of racism. Down South, people are socially nice and politically nasty. So they'll be nice to you at the grocery store, or, you know, having conversations about how to properly cook grits or whatever. And then they vote against everything you ever wanted to believe in. Up north, they are socially mean and politically nice. So they won't speak to you if you walk down the street if they see, initiating a conversation with a stranger almost as a threat, and yet they're more likely to vote politically in the way that I would want them to. So just that difference I find endlessly entertaining as how I guess as a Southerner, because my first impulse as a Southerner is to speak to people, and the looks of alarm that you get when you just start a conversation with somebody is amusing to me as a Southerner. Out west, I lived in LA for 4 years, and I have to honestly say that the West Coast frightens me. And it frightens me because not only is geological problems, earthquakes and fires and all that kind of stuff, but the fact that in parts of the West Coast, there's such a high level of attentiveness to image that can produce some real strange behaviors in people. Because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of substance behind that image, the pursuit of the perfect image. Then I've been in the upper part of the West Coast, like in Washington State, Idaho, Oregon, and the difference between the coast and the eastern side of those states or whatever. Oh my God, it's like one is Aryan nations and the other is, punk rock culture, and so that's kind of interesting to observe and be in the midst of. Most of my trips to the Pacific Northwest were involved in fighting hate groups. So I got to see, uh, you know, California, Oregon, Washington, in ways that the coastal residents don't even recognize as being part of their states.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of microcultures here.
Yeah.
I'm speaking from the West Coast. So here's a really important question. I've been fighting for my disabled son for 25 years. Sometimes I get so tired when I encounter the same biases and misinformation. How does one stay strong and patient in their activism?
Each person has to figure that out for themselves, and I can only describe what works for me. I have the ability, as my mother said this to me, to not let success go to my head, which is kind of a good thing not to have. But she said, most importantly, you don't let failure go to your heart. And she said that after I'd had to birth a baby born of incest when I was 15 years old. And she saw my determination to continue with my education, to graduate high school, to go to college and all of that. And so she said that about me. So I have an inner determination to not let life's challenges defeat me. That I don't know where it comes from. I'm just glad I have it. But in terms of dealing with the compounded challenges of raising a disabled child, for example, my mother had that same situation. My younger sister acquired polio, muscular dystrophy, and spinal meningitis in the 1950s. And she was severely disabled in terms of having, mentally only developed to about a 3-year-old age, because she also had epilepsy that starved her brain of oxygen quite frequently and stuff like that. And I watched my mother and father deal with the challenges of raising a disabled child. And she was only 13 months younger than me. So she and I shared a bed, and I lived intimately with her disabilities and watched its toll on my family. What I am convinced that the problem is not the disabilities, it's the disabling environment in which these disabilities take place. Because there should be more support for people who are parenting disabled children. There should be universal access for every building allowed to be built in the United States. Of course, we need universal health care. We need support for caregivers. There's so much that we need in terms of dealing with people who are parenting generally, but also particularly people who are parenting disabled children. And instead, our society spends its time trying to fix the disability instead of fixing the society in which the disability occurs. And that's part of how we go wrong in many ways.
So this is a little bit related, but in many ways a really very difficult issue. As mom of a transgender teenage son, our state legislature continues to pass legislation which is detrimental to my child. How do you recommend trying to work in a supermajority that won't even listen?
Again, we have to keep in mind that these people who are trying to repeal the entire 20th century are actually a minority, and they cheat because they can't compete. They've chosen to rig elections. They've chosen to deform our democracy so that they can cling to the remnants of power that they have. I think that it starts with having conversations with people who are adjacent to them. Maybe you won't have an impact on them, but someone can have an impact on them. Well, one of the things that I'm really pleased about, for example, is in the 2020 elections, 56% of young white voters between the ages of 18 and 29 voted against Donald Trump. That was the first time in the history of America that a slice of the white demographic did not vote for the candidate that best represented white supremacy. And so that is a very encouraging sign for me that young people are breaking with their parents and their grandparents and using their own intersectional analysis to understand that we're queerer, we're more intersectional. You know, we got all of these diversities that are part of our body politic in the ways that the older people don't necessarily want to concede and stuff. And so understand your sphere of influence. Sometimes you will talk to very like-minded people who are what I call the 90%ers because you have a high degree of unity with them. But outside of them are the 75%ers where you have shared values, even if you don't have a shared language. Then outside of them are the 50%ers that can go either way, left or right, depending on who you talk to, who last talked to them. I consider my parents in that group, by the way, because my father was a military man, ultra nationalist, hyper patriotic, 26 years in the Army saluting the flag. And my mother was a Southern Baptist evangelical Christian. And so they could go to the left or the right, depending on who last talked to them. But one of the ways that I made an inroad with my mom, for example, was that she had started a Girl Scout troop in the 1950s for the Black girls in our community because we weren't allowed into the white Girl Scout troop. And so one of the things she had us do to earn our badges was to fix food for homeless people through her church. And I had to explain to my mother in one of those conversations about the work that I do, the human rights work that I do. I said, Mom, you feed the hungry. And I just ask why they're hungry in the first place. I'm living out your values in a different way. And so when you find people who don't share the way that you're doing the work, you can often talk about the values underneath what they are doing and find a lot of common ground.
Well, on that note, I want to really thank the audience for being just so heartfelt with their questions and their comments. And I want to thank you, Loretta, for being such an insightful and really to the point speaker. And just for everybody, we're going to be posting this session on our website in a week. So if you missed something, you want to hear it again, you want to hear that quote again, please come back and take a minute and share it with your friends. I think this was just such a shareable talk, and I really just can't thank you enough for it.
Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you. So just pull up the last slide for me. Okay, just a quick reminder to everybody that you can visit our website to see the upcoming presentations that we are making available, and also to find links to presentations such as the one we've had today, which was just so completely excellent and the audience is still responding to. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you for the questions, and thank you really from the bottom of my heart, Professor Ross, for sharing such a valuable set of insights and approaches with us.
Thank y'all. Bye-bye.